Hi guys, welcome back to Foliage Loft. My name is Liam, and today I'm just going to go over a few quick tips for you when you're repotting your houseplants. So in my last video, I showed you guys how to create an environmentally friendly soil mixture, and in this video we're going to put that soil mixture to good use. We're going to repot my Monstera Adansonii and my Syngonium Albo. I know that when I first got into houseplants and I wanted to repot my first plant, I figured it would be super easy, and it is pretty simple and it's kind of mundane, but it is kind of therapeutic for you and it's great for your plants. But there are a few tips to keep in mind. So hopefully if you're new to plants, this video is going to help you when you go to repot your plants. But if you have repotted a plant before, maybe just stick around and watch the video, and if you do anything differently or have a different experience or different tips, please weigh in with a comment down below and let me know. I really love reading your comments, and it's one of the reasons why I continue to make these videos. But without further ado, let's get into it. We're gonna start off here by repotting my Monstera Adansonii. And this is a propagation from my original Adansonii, and honestly, I've been a bit of a bad plant parent with this one. I've had it right in the center of the living room, about 12 feet away from a window, so it hasn't really had great light, and it's also been in a terracotta pot, which means the soil is going to dry out a bit quicker than if it was in a plastic pot. And there have been a few times where I've left this plant dry for a little bit too long, so the plant is pretty leggy and has some pretty small and stunted growth. So we're going to pot it into a bigger pot and move it closer to a south-facing window in hopes that this plant will mature a bit more and grow some larger foliage. And I found these plastic pots in a local store, and they're not exactly pretty, but they're very cheap and they have great drainage holes in the bottom. So for our first repotting, we're going to use one of these. And I like to put a little piece of paper towel on the bottom, as it's going to help stop soil from falling out of the bottom of the pot. And obviously paper towel is not a permanent solution for this, as it's going to decompose in the soil. But I found it does a pretty good job for quite some time, at least until it's time to repot again. If you're looking for a more permanent solution for this, you can definitely use some kind of mesh in the bottom of your pot. It can be a little nerve-wracking when you first try to remove your plant from the pot, and in a terracotta pot like this, you can't squeeze the pot like you would with a plastic pot to help you get the plant out. So usually in this situation, I'll grab a knife, and just to create some separation between the pot and the soil. And it's usually best to do this when the soil has at least some moisture within it, maybe not soaking wet, but also not completely dry either. Probably best to water your plant at least a few days before you plan to repot. Once there's a bit of a gap between the soil and the pot, you can grab your plant in a sturdy spot somewhere and pull it out. If the stems of your plant are too thin and too fragile, try to poke your fingers into the soil a bit and grab the soil and pull it out that way. You may have to wiggle things around a bit, but it should come out pretty easily. It also helps to have a container underneath you while you do this. It's going to make cleaning up later much faster. And once your plant is out, you have a choice to make. You can either remove all the soil entirely and repot the plant with new soil, or you can just pot the existing soil that you have into a larger pot around it and top it off with some extra soil around. I usually like to fully replace the soil, especially if it's the original soil that was present when I bought the plant. This way you can provide your plant with a fresh, clean, and nutritious medium to grow in going forward. And this is the part where you really want to be the most patient as you try to separate the soil away from the roots of your plant. And again, this is why you want a bit of moisture in the soil before you start this process, just so your roots are a little bit more flexible and pliable, and you'll be less likely to snap them as you try to get rid of all the soil. It can be a long process sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, depending on your plant and its root structure and just how root bound your plant is. But the way that I like to do it is just to gently roll the soil around in my hands, slowly poking away at the soil, trying to loosen it all up. It's definitely one of those things that feels like you're making zero progress on, and it's pretty easy to get frustrated, but once the soil starts to loosen up, you'll start to make quick progress. Just be careful as you get closer to the roots with your fingers. They can be fragile, especially the really thin ones. And you're just gonna sit here and slowly work away at it. I'm speeding it up, but this plant took about 3 or 4 minutes to completely separate the roots from the soil, which isn't too bad. But this time is gonna vary from plant to plant. It's pretty amazing to see how far they all stretch out once they're uncoiled. And now is a good time to look at the roots. Make sure that they're healthy. They should be a whitish, yellowish, kind of beige color. If you do see any roots that are black or brown, it's a good idea to cut those ones back, as they're probably rotting and you don't want that rot to spread to the healthy roots. After that, it's time to put them into some new soil. So I've already pre-filled my pot about halfway up with soil, and I'm gonna stick the plant right into the pot and kind of situate them where I want them, and I'll slowly start to fill in a bit of soil and then kind of shake it all into place. You really want to fill in all those gaps of air where your roots are sitting inside the pot. Make sure they're completely surrounded by soil. Because we really want to create a stable area in which these rooted cuttings will be able to stand up and support themselves. And once I have a decent amount of soil in the pot, I can start to bury the cuttings a little bit deeper. Just be gentle when you're doing this, you don't want to snap any roots or stems. But once everything is situated and you've filled the pot up with soil, I like to pour a bit of water over it and make sure that each stem is firmly in place. And my end goal for this particular plant is to eventually have it climb up a pole and get mature, grow bigger foliage. So for now, I'm just gonna stake it up with an old chopstick. I'm definitely gonna stake it up to something larger in the coming months, but for now, this is gonna work fine. And there we go, our first repotting is done. From here on out, just water it according to the needs of your specific plant, and maybe just hold off on fertilizing it for a while as the plant gets acclimated to its new home. Now, the second plant we're gonna work on here is a little bit different. This is a Syngonium Albo here, and I bought this one about 6 months ago. I've had a bit of a hard time keeping the variegation strong on some of the new leaves, which I think is a result of having less sunlight over the winter. But the fact that this plant is pushing out new growth is a positive thing, and there are some roots coming out of the bottom of the pot, and that's a great sign for you to repot the plant. The major difference with this plant is that it's in sphagnum moss, and sphagnum moss is a great growing medium, especially for younger plants or cuttings that need help rooting effectively. But the tricky part with sphagnum moss is just separating the roots from the sphagnum moss. It can be a little bit difficult just to determine where the roots end and where the moss begins. They're a similar color, shape, and texture, so you will have to pay just a little bit more attention when you're removing a plant from sphagnum moss in comparison to soil. But it is definitely much easier to remove from the pot, as you can see here. I'm speeding this video up quite a bit. It's about 20 times faster than it actually took. It took about 10 minutes of careful work to get the roots unentangled and separated from this moss. But then once you do get everything separated, the rest of the process is quite similar. You might notice that I'm potting this plant into the pot that my Adansonii was in at the beginning of this video. I just made sure I cleaned out the pot with some soapy water before putting the new plant inside. I think it's always a good idea to clean your pot before you put a new plant in it, just to prevent transferring any kind of pests, mold, or fungus over from the previous plant. And it's definitely easier when you're repotting a plant that's just all in one piece like this Syngonium here, as opposed to when you're dealing with a bunch of different cuttings like it was with the Adansonii I repotted first. You're just going to follow that same process of slowly filling in all the air gaps in the soil and gently setting the plant into its place, making sure that it's nice and stable and it can keep itself upright. And you can see this older leaf here that was bright and healthy when I brought this plant home. It's really started to lose a lot of its beautiful green color, and it's starting to slowly fade into yellow. So I dipped some scissors here into some rubbing alcohol to sterilize them, and then I cut this guy off. But you can probably see this odd little growth on the stem here, which I think is an aerial root. So I chopped just before this point to leave this area of the plant that's still growing. And hopefully at some point this aerial root will make its way down to the soil below. And that's about it for repotting. So there are a few important things to remember. You want to make sure that you're patient and gentle with the roots when you're removing the plant from the soil. And just try to make sure your hands, your tools, and the area that you're working with is clean and sterile before you begin. And also try to keep in mind what kind of pot you should use for your plant as well. So if you have a plant that wants to stay moist, for example, a terracotta pot that is going to dry out the soil quickly probably won't be the right choice, and you should definitely consider something else like a plastic pot or a glazed ceramic pot instead. So I think that's going to wrap up the video for today, guys. I hope it was informative, and if you're going to repot a plant soon, hopefully you go into it feeling just a little bit more confident. If this video did help you in any way, please make sure you hit that like button down below. It does help us out a lot, and also subscribe for more content like this. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya.